developing countries and marginalized communities, these finances are coming too slow and too late. We don't have a lot of time left, and one of the best ways to reach out to the climate finances and to accelerate investments in nature is to show the world what a great work these countries have been doing in avoiding deforestation, in protecting area conservation, in reducing emissions. Unfortunately, the data source is very scarce. Satellites have been a really great revolution over the last couple of decades, where we now have an imagery of an area in any parts of the world, literally every single day. But that's not enough. Satellite images have like a specific resolution, 10 meters per pixel for like Sentinel-2, 3 meters when you want to go commercial with Planet Labs. We do need to involve communities on the ground as well. So what we at Gainforce are doing is basically we work together with the government, together with colleagues on the ground, with boots on the ground in the communities to really create this ladder of trust we call, satellite imagery, drone imagery, field-based data collection, fuse it with AI. AI is uniquely positioned to find a representation that combines all of these together and then help the institutions certify impact to drive investments into these countries. And we've been very honored for our pilot projects and again, for the support of many officials here and super excited to share more about what's going on and also how we can move further and what's also the limitations of this technology, because it's really, really important to understand that technology is a tool, it's not a silver bullet for climate change solutions, and understanding the limitations and opportunities of a technology is crucial for implementation.
Awesome. Thank you, David, for rounding out the in-person introduction. So I want to move to our virtual panelists. So starting with Lissa, could you please go ahead and introduce yourself and your relevant work in this area? Oh, and we don't have audio on you. Oh. So we'll give you just one moment.
Okay.
Could you try again?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Lissa Matyas, and I'm the Vice President of Global Government Affairs at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. And we're a global organization that's based in Canada, and we bring together researchers from all over the world to tackle challenges of urgency to science and humanity. And one of those, of course, is climate change. We have been given the mandate from the Canadian government to run the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, which is the first national strategy of its kind in the world. And there's an envelope of $285 million to really build out this strategy. And one of the ways that we're developing the strategy is through solutions networks. And so we've had a solution network with farmers in India, for example, female farmers in India, and we're looking for new opportunities for solutions networks to address AI and climate change. And so I think one of the obstacles that we've encountered is that because usually countries fund their own researchers and their own activities, it's very difficult to have money flowing across organizations for bilateral, high-level collaboration. And so I hope that during the session we can really address the role of international development banks, large science foundations, and others to really be able to support work between low and middle income countries and researchers that have significant expertise in AI that can deploy some of these technologies more effectively.
Awesome. Thanks, Lissa. And Matt, please round us out.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi there, Matthew Gray, co-founder and co-CEO of TransitionZero. TransitionZero is a climate data analytics not-for-profit, and our mission is to decarbonize energy systems with open, granular, and accessible data. Data science is a big part of what we do because we tend to operate in emerging markets where data is either incomplete or poor. And how we get around that is we tend to use data science and combine that with satellite imagery to estimate productivity and emissions in these regions where that data is publicly unavailable or at a level of granularity that we can't use for the use cases that we have. In that regard, we are also part of a coalition called Climate Trace, which is a group of organizations that come together to monitor greenhouse gas emissions globally. We're responsible for the electricity sector in collaboration with Watttime, and also the heavy industry sector, where we cover steel, cement, aluminium, and pulp and paper. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. So as you can see, right across the panelists, we have a variety of ways in which AI and data science are used for the development of hydrogen in the energy sector, to wildfire detection, to the deployment of finance into communities, to the detection of emissions in the energy sector. And of course, we've heard from a wide variety of sectors here as well: startups, governments, nonprofits, the role of international development banks. And so hopefully this serves as a bit of a premise for the rest of the discussion. So we have a lot of ground to cover over the next 40 minutes. And also I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions on my side and ask the panelists to keep the answers relatively snappy, just so we can make sure we have the time to get to some audience questions as well. So the first ones, and some of you got at this in your answers, but in what ways can AI and data science, and combined with satellite technologies, help address gaps or inequities in climate data? So feel free to kind of put your hand up in this hybrid format if you want to speak, and I'll make sure to sort of get to you. So yeah, how can AI and data science help address gaps or inequities in climate data? All right, Matt, please go for it.
I thought I might as well just stick my virtual hand up. So I think from our perspective, based on the work that we do in emerging markets, is emissions data, or at least up-to-date and accurate emissions data, has historically been a luxury for wealthier nations. So I think the use of AI, and in particular satellite imagery, can really get emerging markets, frontier economies, and least developed countries up the learning curve quicker, because data science tends to scale exponentially rather than linearly. And as a consequence, we can provide base level data far more effectively at a lower cost than sort of some of the traditional techniques that the wealthier economies use.
Absolutely. Yeah. Khalil, I think you were about to chime in too.
First of all, we agree that there is a gap, a huge gap between, like, sometimes with the reality and with what we get from the data. So in the point of view, like in the policy point of view, in that case, we miss a strategy to reduce this gap, because we need to reduce this gap in order to achieve a good result for the mitigation of the measures for the climate changes. In the scientific point of view, we have all the times a gap between in situ measurements and data from satellite, from drones, from whatever. For example, in the project Firefront, where we worked about real-time georeferencing, real-time detecting or classification of fires, we all times have a gap, but in the same time, in order to correct this gap, we need to make another procedure which takes time, human resources, and the money. So, in my point of view, in order to reduce this gap, we need to work on these three things. And the most important is the money, because we cannot really spend again the same amount of money in order to do the same analysis. So one of the things that I want to add, especially in these days of financing days, that we need all the time a huge amount of funding in order to reduce the gap between these data. Second of all, we need also human resources that's ready, that's trained, that's like aware about this problematic, and we need time. With, unfortunately, like, we are paying too much, like, with time, according to the result, according to the climate change. So I will give the word to another person to add more about this question.
All right, David.
I want to give you a maybe surprising use case of AI for addressing climate inequalities, which beyond, of course, we have a lot of satellite data. Seeing is believing. You can see the satellite data. It helps transparency. More transparency unleashes more donations. But I want to provide you with a different idea today, which is what we call measure to earn at Gainforce. So satellite data is really, really powerful, but AI itself is only trained with high quality data. In many areas in the world, we're lacking this data. So we need to collect it. We need to collect field data. In our case, we need to collect trees, like information of trees, the growth. You need to monitor that. That data should be open, but it should never be free. It should be paid to the community. So what we do is we pay 33 cents per tree picture. We limit the number of tree pictures you can upload, but this is where demand from society for proper and fair data matches with communities' needs of local financing. And this is a powerful idea, measure to earn. And we believe that this way, paying people for open and fair data is a really crucial way where we can address community lacks of finances and allow them to be connected to the digital economy.
Thanks. Either Pooja or Lissa, do you want to weigh in on this topic? Yeah, Pooja, please.
Yeah, so just quickly, I think open source technologies can be a game changer to address the gaps, because technologies can sometimes be quite expensive. So open source technologies like the one that you are working on can be a game changer in addressing the inequalities or the gaps.
Absolutely. All right, so next question, and I'm going to throw it to Lissa first. So the next question is about trust. So how trustworthy, right, are AI methods in the climate change space? And if AI-based technologies provide one answer and kind of traditional technologies provide another answer, what should we do? How should we proceed? And what kinds of things do we need to think about here? So Lissa, let's start with you.
Data trust, I think it requires us to think beyond just trust in data and trust in people and in sharing information. And I think that when it comes to low and middle income countries, scientists traditionally have not necessarily engaged in a way that is trustworthy, and it could potentially be not intentional, but it's really, we'd like to learn from you. We'd like to do a one-way transfer, so please give us your data. And it's not necessarily a long-term collaboration on innovation, innovative solutions and co-design of innovation solutions. And so I think that building that sense of trust that there's going to be something in it for both parties is really important. And so it's not that low and middle income countries are going to be just a test base or sort of a living lab without the opportunity to co-innovate, co-create, co-commercialize. And so I feel that we have to change those conversations and move away from international development or just, we need data, please provide your data, to really, how are we going to advance these solutions together, and how are low and middle income countries who are adversely affected by climate change and also suffering from the digital divide going to actually be able to leapfrog using technology to actually benefit their economies and of course, address climate change issues, but at the same time address other inequalities.
Absolutely, thank you for that. So basically the real importance of not thinking of technology as something you transfer, but as something you really co-design alongside the communities for whom it is being utilized and with whom it is being utilized. So absolutely.
Exactly, and the solutions are really impact-based solutions rather than technology-based solutions.
Absolutely. Any of the other panelists want to weigh in on this?
So maybe I can add something like, of course, we cannot trust data 100%. None of the results is sure 100%. None of image can give you exact information. But we can trust us with a percentage. Before we can just get an image one time per month. Then 2 times per month, then weekly. Today we can get image daily. So I think improvement of getting data is going in a way that we can have exact data. But trust just images, remote sensing images of AI techniques, it doesn't make sense. But working together, using like machine learning applied for remote sensing of drone images, of other source data, we can come to the point that we have a good result, but we can also use these results for comparison, for confirmation. Then we can give us signs, we can give us good steps to decision makers to decide for further steps. So this is what I want to add. Thank you.
Absolutely. So yeah, to summarize, maybe I guess to make sure transparency in sort of the way that these estimates are constructed, being explicit about the confidence and probability around how good they are, and really keeping humans in the loop of basically this entire process. So yeah, absolutely. Anybody else want to weigh in? All right. So we started by talking about how AI data science. Oh, sorry, Matt. Feel free to raise your physical hand because I can't actually see your virtual hand that well. But anyway, Matt, please go for it.
Yeah, sorry about that. I should have just raised my hand. I can't actually see you guys, so I'm just I'm hoping you notice me. I think what I would add is I think it depends on what MRV is being used for. There's different types of MRV depending on the user. There's MRV for environmental regulation, there's MRV for climate finance, and there's MRV for policy formation. And each of those types of MRV require different grades of information. And I think that's really important in the context of this issue of trust, and reflecting the fact that I don't think at this stage, especially in the context of the climate trace data that we have, where these data points or these estimates of data can be used for environmental regulation. I think they can form a great basis for anomaly detection, which can then support decision makers on the ground to investigate further. And I think that's really important, and that's where you need to engage local communities and regulators to ensure that trust is established and maintained.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. All right. So maybe moving on to the next question here. So we've started out by talking about ways in which AI and satellite imagery can potentially help address inequities in climate data. But there are also ways in which these technologies might exacerbate various inequities in the climate change picture. So I'd love to pose this question to the panelists. What are ways we should be thinking about in terms of how these technologies can exacerbate inequities, and what should we do about that? So maybe let's start with David, actually.
I think this is such a fantastic question because AI models are only as good as the data they're fed in, right? And unfortunately, the data we have nowadays in the world, if you look at GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Indicator data, most of it is in Europe and North America, but most of biodiversity in the world is actually in South America and Southeast Asia, right? So that's completely the opposite map of the data we have. And the model that you get, and we've shown that in our research, we've peer-reviewed it, published it, AI models, satellite-based models right now that, for example, predict biomass, perform much, much better in countries that has a lot of data, like the US, and really bad in South America. Like, especially when it gets smaller and smaller, where really we have a lack of data. And you have to imagine that when you're using these models and you're not aware of these technical, of these problems, these ethical consequences potentially, you might actually accelerate inequality than hinder it, right? So one way to really think about it is to, in our field of AI, we have AI fairness research that investigates methods to mitigate these problems of fairness, but also make these models more transparent. One way we humans interpret models is using counterfactual reasoning. So we put some data in, get a prediction, we tweak the model a bit, for example, put a little bit more data on one side and a little bit less on the other side, and see how the prediction of the model changes, right? And when we see that it's a little bit fishy, we do need to investigate more. AI research, for example, has published something called model cards, data cards, where we list out potential biases in model and data sets, right? For example, this data set has way too much information about the US and almost no or only a few data points of like trees in South America. Be careful, right? And I think every time we use these models, we need to have this really big flag saying, this is how the model was trained, this is how the data was used, and this could potentially lead to problems. I think it's also an opportunity. Again, a lack of fair, balanced data means that we need to collect more data in these communities. And again, collecting more data is a labor, is a job that we need to pay for if we want to have really, really just models. And that's actually an economic opportunity for these local communities to benefit from the lack of data we have currently. But we need to be really aware and raise this issue at a global scale. Say, okay, if we want to have really just and fair infrastructure, we need to also pay fairly and just for accumulating more data. And that's, I think, a point where we really need to get more upfront with.
Fantastic, yeah. And so, yeah, data equity, very, very important topic. So in addition to data equity, I guess, are there other things that other panelists would like to highlight? And Lissa, sorry, thank you. Lissa, go for it. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
No, there you go.
Okay. I think that we talk a lot about the benefits of AI, but sometimes we don't talk enough about the risks and the negative effects of AI on climate change. And so I think that when you think about data centers or data collection, you know, we're looking at regulations in some of the wealthier countries, but I think that we have to talk about regulations across the world that are more responsible in terms of the use of AI and making sure that we're all in agreement. And it's very, very difficult to agree on data standards. But you know, we need to focus on green AI and not just AI at any cost.
Absolutely. So considering holistically the emissions footprint of AI, as you're saying, both through its applications and in its computational footprint as well. Absolutely. Any other points that looks like? Matt?
Yeah, I would just echo what David said, which is because there's so much data in the global north, machine learning models seem to be typically trained based on that data. So when they're released into markets in the global south, they might not necessarily be as accurate as we would be seeing in places like North America and Europe. And that's where you need to work with locals to acquire that data to verify what you're saying before you make any sort of conclusions that can influence policy.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So, oh, go ahead.
Just maybe you have a case. Just to conclude about this question, is invest in data, invest in capacity building at the low and the middle income countries to use the AI and such imagery analysis, also knowledge transfer, then pushing for global investments in climate change database. I think with these steps, with this statement, we can really avoid that.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think one point I'll personally add that hasn't been brought up yet is that AI is an accelerator of the systems in which it's employed. And so if you're using it to optimize or make more efficient an inequitable system, then the system will continue to be even more inequitable. So if you use, for example, AI in a carbon market that is in its design biased towards certain geographies or certain players, and you use AI to optimize this, then that bias only gets more and more entrenched. So I would just additionally maybe underscore, it's not just the data, and it's not just the data side, but it's really the systems, it's really the models and the assumptions that we're making when actually creating the models as well. So yeah, thank you. So we're talking about a lot of this open data and data sharing, but there's potentially a little bit of a tension between open data and data sovereignty. So in particular, this if we think about making data completely open, this isn't always in line with, for example, the indigenous care principles, which basically say, right, data should really be owned by the people whose data it is. And so how should we deal with this? And I'd like to start with David, because you did talk about this a little bit in your opening.
No worries. If you look at the data point, you have to really understand that this is not like a number in a math equation. This is not an image. This is a human story that has been collected. For example, when we collect a tree picture, if you look at the tree picture, or like a picture of like a small seedling that raises up in a mangrove, you have to also imagine the person who took this picture going through certain times where you can actually access this mangrove. And many times you cannot, because there are alligators, there are crocodiles. It's really harsh to get there. You have to, for example, travel 7 hours to 3 days to get to this spot to take this exact picture at this quality. And while you're taking this picture, probably you get bitten by thousands of mosquitoes. That's what you have to look at when you see this data point. And that data point, of course, we should think about open data, because we want to be transparent. We need to be transparent in order to have funding coming. But this data should also be treated with respect, and the data originators should be treated with respect. And oftentimes that's lacking. And the CARE principles really emphasize and try to emphasize this perspective of where does this data come from, and can we treat the people who collected this data with respect. That includes paying them fairly. That includes protecting their privacy. Imagine you're taking a picture of a very holy site in an indigenous community, right? And then you're revealing to the whole world there are like really valuable trees there. We need to be aware of these consequential decisions we make when we want to open data. It needs to be open, but it needs to be open in a way that doesn't come with harmful consequences to the communities that collected them. These are all the questions that basically is an extended framework of the traditional everything free, everything open source, right? And I think this is a really, really important point when we collect data, that we need to take that human rights component into account.
Absolutely. Basically, think about both the costs and benefits of opening data up, and really approach that conversation with respect for the communities whose data that is. Really awesome point. Pooja, would you like to weigh in?
So just to support David's point, I think it's neither, there's no black and white. I think we need to find a common ground where we are able to create a framework where we can share that data, we can make it more transparent, but at the same time respect that this is owned by somebody, and have that space where it's neither, it's not just complete open data, or it's not complete data sovereignty.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other folks want to weigh in? Okay. So in that case, I'd actually like to open this up for questions from the audience. So does anybody have any questions about the things we reflected on? And also the panelists, you should feel free to pose questions to each other as well here.
Hi, I have a question for the panelists that's a little bit bigger question than even the scope of our discussion. But it seems like there's so many, there's a lot of data discussion about this independent global stocktake initiative, and it seems like none of it is translated to the UNFCCC processes. Do you guys think that there should be a better data pipeline between all of these independent data efforts that's going into the national reporting standards?
Just can you repeat the question for us?
Yeah, sorry, the speakers are kind of unfortunately pointed, but the idea was that there is a lot of discussion about data in the Global Stocktake Initiative and other such things, but it doesn't necessarily work itself way up to the UNFCCC processes. And so should there be kind of more concerted discussion within the UNFCCC processes about data pipelines, concerted collection of data, all of that kind of thing? Okay, actually I'm going to go with Lissa first, if that's
Yes,
all right.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think there's no one better than the UN to really launch a data commons that would be completely fair and equitable to all countries, and also take into consideration biodiversity, because we're talking about human rights, but I think we also have to look at the rights of other, living creatures in the world. And so I think that a data commons that would be led by the UN that would have sign-on from many different countries, many different governments, but also civil society, NGOs, really bringing us all together under a common set of data standards and data collection activities would be really welcome, in my opinion.
I think this is an excellent question, and I think there's not a lot of AI researchers in the UN, and not data machine learning people here. And I think, for example, our team has been attending the United Nations COP for since 2017. We believe we know pretty well the processes, what's going on, but understanding the processes in detail is a whole life's career, right? And you really need to work together with experts from two sides. That's really rare. Having this bridge, and that's rare for many reasons. First of all, working in this field of data collection for United Nations processes is a very rare topic for a United side. Oftentimes we rather go to Google or Facebook to earn our big salaries. So being here is already really rare. And then the language is very different, right? If you're an AI researcher, you have a specific language that the United Nations has a very, very rigid language, really importantly to make sure that we are all on a consensus basis. And for having really this common ground, this bridge, that's lacking a little bit. And that's, I think, what's hindering a little bit the translation from data into actual useful, potentially also capable information that can be translated one-to-one for UNFCCC processes. But we are open and we are here. And one of the reasons we have this discussion of joining this panel is because we would like to have this working together with, but we are really, really aware that just from a data science perspective, we're not getting anywhere. We do need to work very, very closely with delegates, with negotiators, with people from the UNFCCC to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, maybe one point I'll even weigh in with here is that I think that some of the terminology that is applicable in the UNFCCC sphere is also often referring additionally to other things that are dissimilar. So for example, technology in the context of the Global Stocktake Initiative, right? That can be solar panels and wind turbines, that can be data science, and the kinds of things that need to be done to enable these technologies are very, very different. Similarly, even data, right? It's often used to talk about sometimes the output of an analysis and sometimes the raw data that is needed as an input to an analysis, and the kinds of considerations that one needs to think about in this context are very different. So I think the fact that in some sense these topics are discussed at such a level of generality, because we're often conflating multiple things, maybe precludes their translation into more specific mechanisms and things we can actually talk about at the UNFCCC level. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to elaborate on this point because I think it's really, really crucial. And my question to the panelists would be, how do we educate people who are not data savvy and data science savvy especially? I feel like there has been a lot of discussion around collecting data, which of course it's like a prerequisite to do data science, to do AI, but let's assume we have this data, and how can we let people who are not doing the models understand why is this important? Because I have the feeling we've been referring a lot to the fact that we don't have enough investment in data collection, but I feel one of the blockers is that people that decide on this don't really understand why we should collect this data. So just, hearing your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thanks, and I'm going to repeat the question because I think, again, so it's about basically how do we deal with the education component of this, given that both, given data, how do you use it, but also who even understands the need to collect data? So just on all parts of this problem, how do we deal with the education piece?
First of all, thank you for the question. I believe it's a very interesting question, but let's mention that awareness, it could be in educational awareness, is one component of the cycle of investing in data. the responsible of investing in data must also educate people and also communicate with the audience and the civil society, scientific community, decision makers, the whole world about why we are really saving this data. This also one of the weak points actually in this field, because actually there is a lot of initiative. If you just Google like application for whatever it is, you find many young people, children, smart people doing, but people doesn't know nothing about that because we have like a very gap. This is bring us to another question between the media sense or communication sense and science. We are really big. The TV, open the TV, nobody talking about this amazing subject because it's make you sleep actually. But coming back to the point, scientific, go to the Scopus or wherever the platform, ResearchGate, you will find amazing results, but nobody knows about that. So we need actually to invest in this data, but without forgetting the importance of education. Thank you very much for this question. Thank you.
Absolutely. I suspect Lissa has some opinions on this, so I might pass it to you.
Thank you so much. I have strong opinions on this, actually. I think that we need to really reimagine how science is done and how we can build capacity and not necessarily focus on traditional models. So, of course, for hundreds and hundreds of years, we've had universities that educate researchers, and then they have sort of a model of an apprentice model. So you have a few researchers that are at the top, and they have a few graduate students, and then they apprentice for many years, maybe 5 to 7 years doing a PhD, and then they're seen as these are the experts and they can actually collect the data and use the AI tools. And so I think that that's not practical. We just don't have time. We have a climate emergency, and so to build the resources and build research capacity in countries that don't have this history of research is not feasible. And so I think we really need to rethink how we're building capacity around the world. AI is such a powerful tool, and instead of giving the data to somebody in the global north, we need to have South collaboration, and we need to actually empower people to be able to use AI tools for real problems in real time. And so I think that there's other ways of doing this, and I think that the living lab model is a really interesting model where you have all kinds of different actors that are coming together to problem solve, and then sharing the data with other living labs who are also going to learn from those experiences. And so it's much more hands-on, much more immediate. And aside from the living lab, you can have like what they call a lighthouse, which is like really a demonstration of success where others aspire to be this lighthouse within that region, and then they can emulate each other. And so it's really not about a few key researchers that are data experts that are at Ivy League universities around the world, but really being able to have access to this tool much more widely without needing to have this very intricate system of education and research.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lissa. So I see Matt's hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I can comment from the perspective of a small startup, which is, I think the answer is simple, and that is understand your use case and understand your consumer. I mean, what we focus on is using data to improve resource planning decisions in emerging markets, and we can show that quite convincingly to policymakers in those countries. I think where I tend to get a little confused and a little lost, and this goes to David's point, is how our data points fit into the UNFCCC process. I've been coming to COPs for a number of years, and it's always really interesting and fun to present, but I've never really understood how emissions data, and in particular the emergence of alternative data, can fit into the process. And I think there is a role for convening, and I think I really like the point that Lissa made about I forget the phrase, a lighthouse of institutions and organizations sort of showing how this data can be used.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. David or Pooja, do either of you want to weigh in? Okay. I think maybe one thing I'll add is I think there are sort of 3 types of education that are needed in this area, and I think they can be delivered differently. So one of them is AI literacy. So generally, what can you do? And also, how do you evaluate whether something was done properly? Then there's the actual implementation of methods in this area. But then I think the third is the actual operationalization. So how do you actually build an organization that has the capabilities to deal with the data, the analysis, and how do you actually operationalize this aspect? And I think there's a diversity of techniques around whether you do things like set up more concerted educational programs that are meant to, master's programs that are explicitly meant to educate at the intersection of AI in a climate change related area, or whether it just takes, a set of workshops for professionals that are in a particular company already in order to kind of get them up to speed on some of the high level aspects without needing to build out the whole capability. So, yes. We have one more question over here.
I know we are running out of time, but I have a question. I will take advantage of the 3 minutes left. But probably David Dow already knows what is the framework that the Global Innovation Hub is proposing. We are looking into what is needed as opposed to what is perceived as currently possible. So this is a moonshot thinking that will enable, for example, countries, subnational governments and cities to express the demand, the climate demand in terms of core human needs. And then once they understand what are the core human needs that are needed, then we can, through artificial intelligence, matchmaking, all the solutions providers that are out there, matchmake and find what is the best solution. But at the same time, if that is not very evident, we will create an innovation space where you guys, innovators, startups, and different areas of the enabling community can work, collaborate together. So it's about a radical collaboration to fill this demand for innovation. In this context, what the Innovation Hub can bring to you to serve your purposes, serve your goals, and give you this space so that you can work towards climate and the SDGs?
Awesome, thank you. And that was going to be my wrap-up question too. What is the sort of call for action here from all of the panelists? So I'd love to hear from each of you in turn, maybe starting with Pooja.
So from my perspective, I think the call to action should be, I think we should accelerate the adoption of artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. I think that we are still moving very slowly, particularly talking about the sector that I am working in, that is green energy. There is a lot of skepticism, and I think a lot of companies, they do not have in-house capabilities. They are working with smaller firms. They are just outsourcing all the works. I think bigger corporations, energy companies need to build in capabilities in-house because they have that technical knowledge. I think capitalize that to build AI capabilities within their companies so as to be more efficient, energy efficient in general, which can actually save GHG emissions, up to a massive scale. So that is, I think, the call to action from my side.
So from my perspective, I believe that we need to take care a bit about policies, international guidelines, strict measures to protect process data. We need to be a bit clear where the data is saved. We need also a uniform policy. We need a lot of funding to protect this data. Then we need the collaboration that's already mentioned, thank you very much, between all these components. We need like an enzyme, he can collaborate, because sometimes the communication is difficult between scientific point of view, policy, some stuff. And we need also collaboration between all the scientific AI or whatever it is, researchers with the governments and all the components of the states. So, and we need also someone who brings this statement to the negotiations actually in order to achieve with a good result. Thank you very much.
I think technology plays a crucial role because it's very urgent right now. We talked a lot about urgency for climate action, and every year attending COP again and again, physically it's getting more urgent, right? So in order to really achieve urgent, needed, required action, we need to really work all together. One way to work together is to fund and collaborate, like share resources. We can share resources either through data commons, like get all the data from one place, get all the data from the other place, aggregate them together, make them very easy to access at low cost. Also fund, again, data labs, where we just discussed there is not enough data, in order to help innovators from the global north and the global south to build data products, right? Like to leverage this available data commons to build data products that really can drive, accelerate progress in climate action and also help decision makers to right decisions, right? And right now this common data commons, that is really like the thing that is lacking. That's where the UNFCCC is uniquely suited to host that, to coordinate many fractions, academics, public and private sectors, to create this common, to support this common, to fund this common, and then to start data products all around the world to accelerate urgent climate action.
All right, thank you. So maybe next, Matt.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else. The use of these techniques, because it accelerates data availability and provides it affordably to countries that historically haven't been able to afford it. I think it's just understanding the local context and making sure that any data that is informing policy decisions is done in close coordination and collaboration with the countries in question.
Thank you. And Lissa?
Yeah, I agree with all my colleagues. Maybe just as a reminder that AI is a tool, data is a tool, and it's going to be very complicated to unlock this sort of roadblock, and we can't wait. And so I think we need to really think about the wider perspective of, we have a lot of data, we can do better, but let's focus on impact and solutions and not get too bogged down in the issues of collecting and sharing the data, and really remember that this is an emergency, and we need to not lose sight of what we're going to be doing with these tools, and really focus on the global collaboration and breaking down the barriers to collaborating more globally and funding some of these actual projects collectively.
Absolutely. And maybe a last one on my end, I'd say that often when we talk about this, convergence of technologies and problems in the UNFCCC context, we tend to talk about organizations and methods, but it's really, ultimately, it's about people, right? Who are the people who would come in and potentially kind of employ data science for this purpose, who would train or capacity build? There are arguably tens or hundreds of thousands of data scientists around the world who want to leverage their skills for climate action. And you constantly hear from cities, from companies, from all of these entities that we want to, we think data science is relevant to addressing our climate change problems, and we don't know how to get access to this expertise. And something is not matching in the supply and demand problem. And I think it's really an issue of, are we really understanding the people and the incentives and the blockers that at a really micro level to enable those connections to actually form? So I would say the biggest takeaway for the UNFCCC is it's not just about putting the right people in the same room. It's about making sure, understanding what is actually precluding them from talking to each other, from kind of entering each other's organizations, and really doing that micro level analysis as well to actually make that collaboration happen. Yeah. So again, I'm sorry? Yes. Yeah, so thank you so much, everybody, for the great questions. Thank you so much to the panelists for your thoughts. Before we adjourn, yes, let's please take a picture, including the virtual panelists up here. And again, we would love to chat with any of you after the session as well. Thanks so much.